So, in the winter of 1944, millions of people in the Netherlands were plunged into a starvation so severe that it actually altered the biology of the children they hadn't even given birth to yet.
Yeah, the Dutch hunger winter. It's a haunting piece of history for sure.
It really is. But it actually holds this massive key to understanding how human beings survive the absolute unthinkable. Which brings us to what we're doing today. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. Our mission today is to look at the actual, rigorously studied science of resilience.
Right, because we are unpacking a really huge stack of research today to understand what resilience actually is, how it gets built inside the body and the mind, and, why some of the ways we throw that word around today are, well, they're completely wrong.
And honestly, a little toxic.
Yeah, definitely a little toxic. It's just a concept that carries so much cultural baggage. I mean, we're practically programmed to celebrate the person who gets knocked down and just instantly springs back to their feet.
Right, right.
But the actual science is far more nuanced, and honestly, much more hopeful than those cultural cliches would have you believe.
Well, I think we need to start by tearing down a massive assumption right off the bat, because we tend to talk about resilience like it is this superhero force field.
Yes, exactly.
Like it's a genetic trait you're either born with, like having blue eyes or being double jointed, or you are just not. And the assumption is that if you have this force field, trauma just harmlessly ricochets off you, and if you don't, you just shatter.
Right. That is absolutely the dominant cultural narrative. But the research points in a completely different direction. To understand why it isn't this magical superhero trait, we should probably look at where the word actually originated.
Okay.
Because resilience didn't actually start out as a psychological concept at all.
Wait, really?
No. Its first major scientific home was actually in materials, science, and engineering.
So we're talking about like construction materials, metallurgy, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Engineers used it to describe a material's capacity to absorb energy and return to its original shape after being deformed. So the root of the word is the Latin rislere, which literally means to spring back.
To spring back.
Think of a physical spring, right?
Yeah.
Or you're given a rubber ball. You squeeze that ball or you hurl it against a brick wall. It absorbs all that kinetic energy, squishes flat for a millisecond, and then snaps right back into a perfect sphere.
A literal bounce back. I mean, that makes perfect sense for physics.
Right. And from there, it actually moved into ecology. So in 1973, there was this ecologist named C.S. Halling, and he wrote this landmark paper applying the term to ecosystems.
Okay, so moving from rubber balls to forests.
Exactly. He wanted to draw a line between an ecosystem that is merely stable, meaning it just stays exactly the same in a vacuum, and one that is resilient. So a resilient forest, for example, is one that can absorb a massive disturbance, like a devastating wildfire, and dynamically reorganize itself while still retaining its core function as a forest.
Oh, wow. So it adapts to the fire rather than just resisting it. I can see how that concept slowly crept toward human behavior.
Yeah, and it finally made the jump to human psychology in the 1970s. Up until that point, developmental psychology was incredibly deficit-focused,
Deficit-focused meaning what exactly?
meaning the whole field was essentially designed to pathologize. The primary question researchers were always asking was, well, what goes wrong for at-risk kids?
Ah, I see.
If a child grew up in severe poverty or experienced trauma or had parents struggling with severe mental illness, the clinical assumption was just that they were fundamentally doomed to poor outcomes.
They were just written off.
Basically, yeah. But a clinical psychologist named Norman Garmese started noticing a glaring flaw in that assumption. He was studying children of parents with schizophrenia, and conventional wisdom dictated that these kids would invariably struggle with their own severe pathologies.
But he didn't.
Well, Garmese saw that a really meaningful subset of these children were entirely competent in school, they were socially engaged, they were emotionally steady.
So he found the outliers, like the kids who were defying the statistical gravity of their situation.
Exactly. And he was fascinated by the mechanics of that survival. Like, why did these specific kids thrive? So Garmese flipped the psychological script from what goes wrong to what goes right.
Which is a huge paradigm shift.
It was massive. He pioneered the study of protective factors, which is a term we still use today. But early on, he used another label for these kids that was a bit problematic. He called them invulnerable children.
Oh. Yeah, I have to push back on that label right there.
Go for it.
Because jumping from a rubber ball that snaps back into a perfect sphere to a child experiencing profound human trauma is a massive leap. I mean, if a rubber ball bounces back completely unchanged, calling a kid invulnerable implies they were literally untouched by the trauma of having a severely ill parent.
Right.
And just knowing how human neurobiology works, being completely untouched by chronic childhood stress seems, well, impossible.
You're completely right, and the field eventually caught up to that exact critique. You simply cannot be completely untouched by significant adversity. A human being is not a rubber ball.
Right.
Treating resilience like a rare, fixed trait, like being literally invulnerable, was not just scientifically inaccurate, it was actively unhelpful. So by the 1990s, the American Psychological Association formalized a very specific shift in how we define this.
What's the official definition now, then?
Resilience is now understood as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, or significant stress. It is the capacity to cope with a crisis and return to a pre-crisis level of functioning.
Process. There's a massive distinction there. It's a dynamic process, not a genetic lottery ticket.
Exactly.
And based on that definition, it actually requires real risks. Like, you can't actually be resilient if you haven't faced genuine hardship.
You need the stressor to activate the adaptation, yeah. And the researcher who really championed this shift away from that invulnerable superhero myth was a developmental psychologist named Ann Maston. In a famous 2001 paper, she coined a term that completely changed the landscape of the field. She called it ordinary magic.
Ordinary magic? That sounds like an oxymoron.
It was definitely meant to be provocative. Maston's whole point was that resilience is not some mystical quality found in a few remarkable individuals. It is just the everyday output of normal human adaptive systems operating under abnormal conditions.
Wow.
Right? If your basic fundamental systems are protected and functioning, like your brain development, your sense of agency, your community support, you will likely show resilience. It's ordinary magic.
I love that framing because it is so incredibly destigmatizing for you as a listener. It moves resilience from being a superpower to a recipe that you can actually bake.
Yes, a recipe is a perfect way to look at it.
As long as you have access to the right ingredients, you can create it. So if we look at the actual data, what are the specific ingredients for this ordinary magic?
To answer that, we really have to look at what is arguably the most famous resilience study ever conducted. It's Emmy Werner's Kauai longitudinal study.
The Kauai study, right?
It's just an absolute masterpiece of psychological tracking. Starting in 1955, Werner and her team didn't just take a quick survey. They tracked all 698 children born on the Hawaiian island of Kauai that year.
Oh, wow. Every single one.
Every single one. And they followed them from birth all the way into their 30s and 40s. They looked at police records, marriage records, employment histories, and they conducted in-depth interviews across 4 whole decades.
Tracking almost 700 people for 40 years is an astonishing amount of data.
It's unheard of today, honestly.
Yeah.
Now, about 1/3 of these children were classified as high risk. They were born into chronic poverty, family discord, parental alcoholism, or severe mental illness.
So the kids we talked about earlier.
Right. And based on those old deficit-focused models of psychology, these kids were on a dark, unavoidable path. But Werner found that roughly 1 in 3 of that specific high-risk group grew into competent, confident, caring adults. They didn't just survive, they thrived.
Okay, so if a third of those high-risk kids thrived while the others struggled, they must have had some kind of buffer. What was the defining ingredient in their recipe that the others lacked?
The data pointed to one overwhelming protective factor. Just one single most crucial ingredient, which was having at least one stable, caring adult relationship.
Wait, just one adult?
Just one. And crucially, it did not have to be a parent.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because for many of these kids, their parents were the actual source of the trauma. The stable adult was often, a grandparent or an observant neighbor who just made them a snack every day, or a teacher who took a specific interest in their well-being.
When you think about the mechanics of that, it makes total sense because a child's nervous system is not fully developed. They rely on adults for co-regulation.
Exactly.
So if their home life is constantly triggering a fight or flight response, their nervous system is just on fire. But that one teacher or neighbor provides a literal physical space where the child's heart rate can actually drop, where they feel safe. That adult acts as an external biological regulator.
You nailed it. That is the precise mechanism of ordinary magic.
Yeah.
And alongside that vital relationship, Werner identified 2 other key factors.
Okay, what were they?
First, engagement in a structured social group, like a local club, a sports team, or a faith community, something that provides a web of predictability. And second, an internal locus of control.
Let's anchor that term for a second because that's important. An internal locus of control for, say, a 10-year-old living in poverty. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it is the deep-seated belief that you have some agency over your own life, even when your environment is totally chaotic.
Like finding a loophole in the chaos.
Yeah, it's the child who figures out that, hey, if they escape to the quiet of the public library every afternoon to do their homework, they can actually control their grades, even if they have absolutely no control over the screaming matches happening at their house. They recognize a direct link between their own actions and their outcomes.
Okay, so if resilience is a recipe of accumulated protective factors, a caring adult, a community, a sense of agency, what happens when the scale tips too far the other way?
That's the darker side of this, yeah.
Because if you are listening to this right now and mentally calculating your own ledger of stress, it begs the question, what happens to the body when the risk ingredients completely overwhelm the protective ones? We aren't just talking about a psychological attitude here. Trauma takes up residence in the physical body.
It fundamentally alters the physical body. And to understand the stakes of resilience, we really have to move from psychological outcomes to biological realities, because adversity has a physical shape.
Right.
In 1995, researchers Vincent Folletti and Robert Anda launched the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, widely known as the ACE study. They did this through Kaiser Permanente, and they surveyed over 17,000 adults about childhood traumas.
17,000 adults?
Yeah. They asked about things like physical abuse, emotional neglect, or household dysfunction.
With 17,000 adults, you aren't just looking at psychological quirks anymore. You are looking at massive epidemiological data. So did they find a physical fingerprint of that childhood trauma in these adults?
They found a stunning dose-response relationship, meaning the higher the quote-unquote dose of accumulated childhood adversity, the dramatically higher the risk for severe adult health issues. We were talking about depression and substance abuse, yes, but also autoimmune disorders, cancer, and heart disease.
I need to pause on that for a second. Heart disease. Decades later, directly linked to childhood stress. Walk me through the actual biological mechanics of how a chaotic childhood causes a heart attack at age 50.
So the mechanism is something called allostatic load. When you experience a threat, your amygdala sounds the alarm, flooding your body with adrenaline and cortisol.
The classic fight or flight.
Right. Your heart rate spikes, your blood vessels constrict, you are ready to run.
Yeah.
And that is a brilliant evolutionary response if you are running from a literal predator. But if the predator is an abusive parent or chronic grinding poverty, that alarm never shuts off.
Your baseline just becomes a state of emergency.
Exactly. Your body is practically marinated in cortisol. And over years, that chronic inflammation literally damages the lining of your blood vessels. It accelerates plaque buildup in your arteries.
Oh, wow.
So if you lack those protective factors, if you don't have that one stable adult to help soothe your nervous system and turn off the alarm, your physical organs literally bear the ledger of that chronic stress.
Yeah.
That biological wear and tear is the allostatic load.
The biological ledger. That is incredibly heavy. But it gets even deeper when you look at the research on epigenetic resilience, doesn't it? The idea that trauma and potentially the adaptation to survive it can actually alter gene expression.
Yes, and this is where we return to the Dutch hunger winter that you mentioned at the very beginning.
Oh, right. Let's bring that back.
So from late 1944 to the spring of 1945, the Nazi-occupied Western Netherlands suffered a horrific famine. Daily rations dropped below 1,000 calories for months. People were literally eating tulip bulbs to survive.
Just to get anything in their stomachs.
Decades later, researchers studied the adults who had been prenatally exposed to that famine, meaning their mothers were pregnant with them during the starvation.
So these people didn't consciously remember the famine at all. They were in the womb.
Yet researchers found lasting metabolic effects in their biology. Their bodies were holding on to calories differently. They were uniquely prone to obesity and metabolic issues.
That's epigenetics in action.
Exactly. A helpful way to picture epigenetics is to think of your DNA like a piano keyboard. Trauma doesn't add or remove the physical keys. Your underlying genetic code remains exactly the same.
Okay, the keys are still there.
But environmental factors like severe starvation or profound trauma can press down the pedals of that piano. They change the volume, altering how certain genes are expressed or silenced.
And researchers like Rachel Yehuda have looked at this with the descendants of Holocaust survivors, right?
Sure.
Finding that altered cortisol regulation, the way the body handles stress, can actually be passed down to the next generation. Like the piano pedal is held down for the children.
It is a biological preparation for a harsh world. The trauma leaves a footprint, yes, but so is the capacity to survive it. Vulnerability and resilience actually have intergenerational dimensions.
It's just wild to think about. But if we bring this back to the immediate aftermath of an adverse event, I want to look at how we process tragedy in real time. Because society just bombards us with the narrative that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Oh, the classic Friedrich Nietzsche quote.
Right. We are completely obsessed with the idea of post-traumatic growth. If you suffer a terrible loss, the expectation is that you will eventually, I don't know, write a memoir, start a charity, and become a fundamentally enlightened being.
This is where the work of clinical psychologist George Bonanno is so incredibly disruptive. Because Bonanno studies trajectories. Instead of just taking a snapshot of someone immediately after a tragedy, he tracks their functioning over a long period of time.
Like months or years.
Years. He conducted massive studies on adults after the death of a spouse, and he studied the survivors of the September 11th terror attacks. For decades, the dominant clinical lore was that severe extended mourning was the only normal response.
Right.
The expectation was that a healthy person would experience a dramatic drop in their ability to function and then embark on this slow, agonizing climb back to normalcy.
And if you didn't break down completely, people assumed you were just in denial, like you were bottling it up.
Exactly. But Bonanno overturned that entirely. He consistently found that a stable, resilient trajectory was actually the single most common pattern.
The most common.
By far. The most frequent outcome wasn't a dramatic breakdown followed by a triumphant comeback. It was people maintaining relatively steady, healthy functioning throughout the adverse event. They kept going to work, they kept taking care of their kids, their outward functioning barely dipped.
You know, that feels incredibly validating to hear. Just staying the course, just holding steady is actually the norm. You don't have to experience this massive transformational post-traumatic growth to prove you are resilient.
That's right. Resilience and post-traumatic growth are distinct concepts. Post-traumatic growth, which was coined by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, refers to positive psychological change resulting from the struggle with trauma. You grow beyond your previous baseline.
But resilience is different.
Resilience is simply about maintaining your baseline. Sometimes, just holding your ground in a storm is a profound victory.
But I imagine this finding feeds right into one of the biggest myths about resilience, the idea that resilient people are just incredibly tough and don't feel the pain. Like, if someone is on that stable, resilient trajectory and still going to work after losing a spouse, society looks at them and says, wow, they're so strong, they aren't even sad.
And that is a really dangerous misinterpretation. Resilience is continued functioning alongside distress, not the absence of distress.
Alongside distress.
Yes. The person who gets up and makes breakfast for their kids the week after a profound loss is still grieving intensely. They might be crying in the shower. They're experiencing deep pain, but they are managing to keep their adaptive systems running while they process it.
Which perfectly bridges into another massive flaw in how we label people. I hear schools or workplaces all the time saying, oh, Sarah's so resilient, treating it like it is her defining personality trait. But if she is crying in the shower, that blanket label covers up a lot of suffering.
The developmental psychologist Sonia Luthor has a really brilliant critique of this. She argues we need to stop using resilient as a blanket adjective for a person, because resilience is highly domain-specific and situational.
Meaning you can be resilient in one area, but not another.
Exactly. A teenager might be academically resilient, getting straight A's and leading the debate team despite a chaotic home life, but simultaneously be completely crumbling emotionally, struggling with an eating disorder or self-harm.
So calling them a resilient kid just obscures the domain where they are actually drowning.
It gives the adults around them an excuse not to intervene. And that actually brings us to what is easily the most controversial debate in the entire field of resilience research today. It's the politics of how the word is used.
Okay, let's get into the politics.
Sociologists refer to this as the responsibilization critique.
Responsibilization. Let me guess. If resilience is deeply dependent on having resources, like a strong community, stable adults, financial security, then telling someone who lacks all those things to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and be more resilient is basically victim blaming.
It is a very quiet way of letting institutions off the hook. Critics argue that when we frame resilience purely as an individual psychological trait, we shift the burden of survival entirely onto the individual, while completely ignoring the systemic failures that are causing the adversity in the first place.
Right. Using resilience as a corporate buzzword feels exactly like handing an employee a slightly sturdier umbrella rather than, I don't know, fixing the massive hole in the roof that is flooding their office.
That's a great analogy. And we saw this play out on a massive scale in the 2010s. There was this huge proliferation of resilience training programs in corporate environments and the military. A widely debated example was the U.S. Army's Comprehensive Soldier Fitness Program, which launched in 2009.
What was the goal there?
The military invested heavily in teaching soldiers psychological coping mechanisms to prevent PTSD.
But what was the scientific pushback on a program like that? Because teaching coping skills sounds good on paper.
The pushback was that the claimed effectiveness of these massive, sweeping programs often outpaced the rigorous scientific evidence backing them up. But more broadly, labor advocates point out the inherent danger of this framework in the civilian workforce.
How so?
Imagine an underpaid, overworked employee dealing with a toxic management structure. Instead of raising their wages, improving their job security, or firing the abusive manager, the corporation forces them to attend a mandatory seminar on building resilience through deep breathing.
We aren't going to pay you a living wage, but here is a module on mindfulness. I can totally see why that weaponizes the concept. It completely ignores the science we just talked about. If you lack the external protective factors, if you are starved of financial stability and social support, a breathing exercise isn't going to lower your allostatic load.
Blaming an individual for lacking resilience when you are actively depriving them of the resources required to build it is a fundamental misreading of the science.
So we have taken resilience out of the realm of magic force fields and literal rubber balls. We know it is a dynamic process, an ordinary magic built on relationships, community, and agency. We know the biological toll of the allostatic load, and we know that telling people to just be tougher without giving them resources is a systemic failure.
Yes.
If you are listening to this right now, how do we take this massive stack of research and actually apply it? Why does knowing the mechanics of this matter to you?
It matters on a macro level and a profoundly micro level. On a systemic level, this science is quietly redesigning our institutions. Schools across the country are using ACE-informed frameworks to design trauma-sensitive classrooms.
So the teachers are trained differently.
Right. A teacher trained in this science knows that a disruptive, aggressive student might not be a bad kid. They might be a child dealing with an overwhelming allostatic load whose nervous system is just stuck in fight or flight. The discipline shifts from punishment to co-regulation.
The teacher becomes the stable adult ingredient. That's beautiful. And what about in healthcare?
Hospitals and emergency services are actually calibrating their post-disaster care based on George Bonanno's trajectory research.
The grief trajectories.
Right. Because they now know that a stable, resilient trajectory is the statistical norm. They don't force mandatory intensive grief counseling on every single survivor immediately after an event.
Oh, because that might interfere with their own process.
Yes, forcing someone to relive trauma when they are naturally holding steady can sometimes disrupt their innate coping mechanisms. So they offer the support, but they respect the ordinary magic.
And for the person listening, on a deeply personal level, understanding that ordinary magic is a massive relief. If you are someone who has ever felt like you weren't tough enough or wondered why you couldn't just magically snap back from a loss without carrying the scars, this science tells you that you aren't broken.
You're definitely not.
Resilience isn't a genetic lottery that you somehow lost. It is an outcome of relationships, skills, and systems that you can deliberately cultivate over time.
You can absolutely gather the ingredients. But, if we look at the world we are living in right now, the science leaves us with a rather provocative reality to confront.
What do you mean?
Well, if the absolute bedrock of resilience, the most vital, non-negotiable ingredient in that ordinary magic, is strong community ties and the physical presence of stable, caring human relationships, what does the future of human resilience actually look like?
You mean because of the loneliness epidemic?
We are living in an era of unprecedented digital isolation and fractured physical communities. If resilience biologically relies on social support and co-regulation, are we accidentally, culturally depleting our own protective factors?
That is wow.
Human connection is the original technology for survival. When we isolate ourselves, we are stripping away the very systems that evolved over millions of years to help us process adversity.
That is chilling. When you think back to Emmy Werner's Kauai study, the deciding factor for those high-risk kids who thrived wasn't a meditation app. It wasn't a productivity hack or a mindset course. It was just one stable, caring adult.
Yes, ma'am.
It was a web of actual human connections. And if that web gets frayed by isolation, the capacity to bounce back just drops.
The buffer just disappears.
That gives every single one of us a lot of homework. It makes you realize that building resilience isn't just a solo bootstrap project where you meditate your way to mental toughness. It is a community project.
Yeah.
So, to you listening right now, who are your protective factors? Who is the stable, caring person you can call when your own allostatic load is redlining? And perhaps even more importantly, looking around your own community. Who are you providing that stability for in turn? Whose nervous system are you helping to regulate?
Because that shared connection is where the real magic happens.
It's ordinary, but it's magic. Until next time, keep diving deep.